Commander is changing rather dramatically. There's more news. That's right. You thought the bans last Monday was it? No, there's more. There's more. If you're looking to buy a single product or sealed product, use the link to coolstuffinc.com in the description below. Code Kenobi at checkout. Help support the show. Get 5% off your order and get one of these wonderful Kenobi-based tokens when you use my code. If I look like trash in this video, it's because I feel like trash. I'm actually quite sick and my nose is absolutely ruined from blowing it too much. It's like chapped and everything. So I'm going to use a lot more B-roll on screen, or at least images on screen, to hide my unwell face today. Wasn't going to make a video, but big news. In short, the Rules Committee have stepped down or back. Wizards announced today, in partnership with members of the existing Rules Committee, we're announcing that the Rules Committee is giving management of the Commander format to the game design team of Wizards of the Coast. This was explained primarily as to be a response to the amount of vitriol and harassment and threats that the Rules Committee got from members of the community. I say members of the community. I don't count anyone who's sending harassment and threats of violence at people to be part of the community. They are outliers that I don't think are actually welcome at my table or most people's tables. Be really direct about it, fuck those people. Transparency, I have friends on the Rules Committee. I'm quite good friends with Olivia Gobo-Hicks, so perhaps I have a slight bias, but I think any reasonable human being that has any empathy would think that this kind of harassment and threats of violence are not okay. Jim and Olivia stepped up into the Rules Committee with the blessing of Sheldon Menery when he passed away, and Jim tweeted yesterday about how part of what's caused all this was that he didn't really know what to do once the harassment started coming in. He felt an inability to protect himself and the people he cares about because, well, I don't blame him. As someone who got bombarded with a load of hate only a week or two ago for making a podcast about a certain topic in Warhammer and getting called slurs left, right and centre and threats of... mine were less threats of violence as people were saying they wish I was dead. Does that count? But either way, I can relate. Being on the internet is fucking rough when a lot of people decide to try and make your life a misery. So I thought I'd open the video by explaining that I completely and utterly think that anyone doing this was an arsehole. You got really fucking angry and bitter that some cards that cost some money were banned, and sure, there's a reasonable problem there. I even highlight that in my original video, that losing cards that were worth money is a problem, especially all at once. But that doesn't in any way excuse the way some people have acted over the last week. Those people are just arseholes. Beyond that, if this news makes you happy or makes you feel like they've ran away with their tail between their legs or whatever turn of phrase people are using to describe their victory here, but via the use of harassment and threats, then you're a fucking dickhead. Like this shouldn't be a victory lap for you. It should be a wake-up call that the way you've acted is not appropriate. Truth be told, you can still disagree with the bans and the way they were done. That's absolutely fine. But that shouldn't involve the level of vitriol aimed at human beings, especially over what amounts to children's cards that do cost real-world money. I understand that, but that's one of the risks you actually take in picking up Magic the Gathering cards. They're not always going to hold the fucking money that you associate with. And that's coming from someone who was actually I was empathetic to the plight of people losing money on this shit. But this outcome is embarrassing. This is egg on the face of the entire Magic community. This is fucking stupid. Fuck you for doing this. So with all of that said, I guess we now need to address the issue that we've got, is that instead of having an independent group of people assess Commander and the play patterns that we should want in Commander and try to adjudicate where we want Commander to be, we now have Wizards of the Coast doing it instead. To talk briefly about the Rules Committee as is, as was, and as ongoing as advisory groups to the Wizards of the Coast now, they kind of had a thankless and impossible task. For the longest time, especially under the tutelage of Sheldon, who I counted as a friend, by the way. This is not some slight on him or his name. I thought Sheldon was great and I miss him dearly. But the RC took a very hands-off, relaxed approach to Commander that many people, myself at times included, criticised as being too hands-off. And I've gone back and forth on how I feel about this, and especially with what's going on right now, I wonder if the hands-off approach was actually the correct way to go. I keep thinking about how Commander as a format is so unique to any other format in Magic and how it's almost impossible to truly balance it in any way. Commander is, in essence, 3 or 4 different game modes all tied together by the same ban list and the same pool of players and the same collection of cards. Part of the issues with the current ban was that some people argued it was too moderate and improve the play patterns of casual players, and thus it hurt the competitive players. Meanwhile, other players said it was absolutely fine because it only really hurt the competitive players because they're the ones who want to play with this stuff. There's arguments about inconsistencies, which I don't think are actually valid. I think the original announcement talking about fast mana pretty much clearly framed what they were trying to do with these bans. But ultimately, it's true. There's an inconsistency in approach over the years, and the way things were banned and approached was not necessarily the best way of going about it. Something that some people might have missed if they're not on Twitter or Reddit is that Jim had decided to break their silence about how people normally vote and explained that Olivia herself, for example, was not keen to ban the cards that were banned. They even went as far as to putting out her preferred course of action, which was to ban Nadu and Dockside, then wait for the tools we're currently developing in cooperation with Wizards that will hopefully make it easier for people to find like-minded folks to play with, and then reassess Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus. I'll talk a little bit about the tools they're developing towards the end of the video. I don't want to talk about it too extensively because we haven't got the full lowdown yet, but I'm not hugely optimistic at the sound of it, if I'm honest. But that aside, I really think that the transparency of explaining this so people can get the fuck off Olivia's back, but also giving us this potential alternative timeline was interesting because, let's be honest, most people would go for this over what happened. But alas, alternative timelines are not really that helpful when we're living in the current one. When I saw that the RC has got sort of stepped back and now Wizards are in control, my first reaction was definitely not one of happiness, that's for sure. I do think that having something like the Rules Committee be a at least somewhat separate body to Wizards of the Coast in terms of what they do and what they ban is a good thing. There is some weirdness to that. A lot of people kind of consider them one and the same. I know I did for quite some time. I think that was kind of put to bed on Monday of last week when they banned Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, something that I imagine Wizards of the Coast would never have done in that circumstance. So I kind of saw the last six bannings, although messy and perhaps not approached in the correct way, to be something that's proved they were willing to step out from underneath the shadow or the thumb of Wizards of the Coast. Unfortunately, the ensuing harassment and or backlash internally, we will never really know what happened at Wizards, right? But all of that has now come to this point where the Rules Committee are no longer in control of the format. Instead, the company that makes the game are, which to most people probably sounds fine. The problem is Wizards of the Coast do, in spite of the fact that most of their designers are very, very good people and generally love this game, want to shepherd it in the right way, but Wizards of the Coast as a collective is answering to Big Daddy Hasbro and shareholders and people in boardrooms who give less of a shit about the play expense of Magic and more of a shit about the end of year numbers and the ever increasing profit margins of Wizards of the Coast. Don't forget that Wizards of the Coast are the golden goose that Hasbro has to milk because as a parent company it's not doing too good, and that golden goose has got one particular teat that is much larger and riper than the others. That teat is called Commander, and they were already doing this stuff previously. They have printed something like Jeweled Lotus, for example, which I think is the most gratuitous tweaking of the nipple that we can ever see in this weird metaphor that I'm still pushing forward into this next paragraph. But Jeweled Lotus is an example of Wizards of the Coast really pushing to have cards that are super staples for Commander materialized out of thin air, fresh and ready to go, directly aimed at Commander as somewhere for them to be played and sold. Now, I've done videos on how mistakes in Commander design have been bad for 1v1, but ultimately I'm okay with them existing if we're willing to ban them where they need to be, if they end up improving the play patterns in Commander. Initiative being a good example of this. I did a whole video that you can watch. I'll be linked down below and in the comments of this video. And I think a lot of the for Commander design that we kind of ignore is things where they've improved how white and red work in multiplayer larger games where you're not just trying to get to 4 mana, curve out and smash your opponent in aggro. There's been a huge amount of development and design space opened up and improved upon through the designing with Commander in mind sort of idea. The idea of that all of designs for Commander are bad is just, strictly speaking, not true. However, there are examples that are, and I think Jeweled Lotus is one that I missed from my original video of being one of the most egregious. It was expensive immediately overnight, not only for its sort of heritage of being a Lotus-related artifact, but because it was, you know, an auto include in almost every single Commander deck. Something I didn't labor enough in my previous video about the bans is that I was really happy to see it go as a sign that the Rules Committee were willing to undo some of the problems that Wizards have created through bannings. What I did talk about in that video is that the backlash is a huge responsibility of Wizards of the Coast themselves, because they are the ones that put all of this in motion by printing this crap. I think them being in control of the format itself is largely going to be fine because the format can be left on its own to be a format that we converse about before we play. We have that rule zero conversation, or we just talk to each other like normal human beings and be sociable, and the format will work. Point me and Prof came to an agreement on and joked about a lot on the podcast back in the day was that Commander works because we want it to. If we put the effort into making it work, it will work. Much like any board game, even with bad rules or broken designs. And thus, weirdly, I think we'll look back on this as being a non-issue because Commander will survive and just outshine whatever minimal hands-off approach Wizards will probably go for. But the truth is they print more stuff like Dual Lotus in the future to create reprint equity, to sell us packs, from a capitalistic perspective. They want to do that, and those things will never be considered for a ban if they can be good reprint equity. We already see them allowing Nardu to live for way too long, explicitly stating that they don't want to hurt people who've bought into it, even though everyone and their dog was in agreement that the card needed to go in Modern. And we saw this to a lesser extent and less explicitly with Grief and with Fury and with the One Ring. It's not banned now, but mark my words, give it 24 months and the One Ring will be banned somewhere, due mainly to its omnipresence in older formats like Modern. Now imagine that situation where obnoxious things have been put into the format that a lot of people are frustrated by and don't think should exist. Dual Lotus being an example of that, I guess, but the level of how obnoxious it is kind of hidden by how casual the format is. But imagine those frustrations dockside is probably the best example. But then Wizards of the Coast are in charge of that banning, and they don't even have the pressure of people pointing to tournament statistics and the stats around how often a card like the One Ring, for example, is found indexed in Modern. We'll get card statistics from EDHREC, but we all know those are relatively skewed too. So really, there'll just be no reason to act. I think we're going to see hands off again, and that's fine, but it really depends upon what Wizards decide to print into the format going forward as well. They're going to talk more about what this means for Commander and Magic moving forward today. This video is going to come out around the time that they start talking about it on the official Magic channels. But I want to get ahead of that and have some thoughts out there because people have asked me how I feel about it already, because I often have feelings about this stuff because that's kind of my job. They also talked about a 4-tier system where cards will be put into tier 4 being the strongest, 1 being the weakest. And that'll be through like number of cards in each tier. You can judge what your deck is, but if your deck is a tier 1 deck, which is actually the worst tier, but it has 1 Ancient Tomb is the example they give, then maybe it's not the most powered up thing. And honestly, I'm not going to labour the explanation of this until we get more details, but I'm already very skeptical that this is anything beyond the previous power system, except a lot of cards are hard codified into each power level. Now, to be generous, having some hard codified lists of stuff you should or shouldn't play in certain social situations is probably a good thing. And reducing the power system thing from being a 1 to 10 thing and down instead to a 1 to 4 thing does make it easier to grasp. The problem I have with all of this is that how many cards are going to be actually codified? Are they going to codify every card in Magic's existence? I assume not. And I also think it's going to villainize certain cards more. They mentioned Vampiric Tutor being one of the higher tier cards. Bracket 4 will have Vamp Tutor, and thus, if I play Vamp Tutor in one of my derpy, like, blue-black Styria creature decks that I've got, people are going to see Vamp Tutor or hear Vamp Tutor, and I know they're saying you can play a bracket 1 deck with some bracket 4 cards, but I don't think casual players are going to fully grasp that or take that at face value. I've had games before where I've fetched for a dual land in a deck that is not very powerful, but because I fetched for a dual land for my mana to be good, like a real dual land, the cost of that card has made me the enemy at the table because people assume duals equal power. And whilst it makes your mana more consistent and less painful, duels don't necessarily make your deck good. There'll also be weird gamified shit probably where people will just not play tier 4 cards but play a lot of combos that are considered not tier 4 to get into tier 3. How does like Splinter Twin and Pestamite work? Are they both tier 4 or are they tier 4 in combination? Ultimately, we're going to have to wait and find out. And that's why I said I wouldn't go into it extensively, but I'm just saying that at first glance, I really don't like the sound of this, but I'm absolutely willing to be proven wrong by a robust, built up, basically 4 different formats with various soft ban lists, essentially. But something I will say that I'll elaborate more on once we see the brackets and such is that, do we really need to balance Commander as much as we're trying to? I went to Command Fest over the weekend and played, I think it was 7 or 8 games with randomers and more games with people that I've played with before, old friends and such. And all of the games were pretty solid. There was only one really weird interaction where an opponent, a friend of mine, John, didn't tooth and nail for the win because we all felt like it was a really dissatisfying way to end the game. So we just kept going, in spite of the fact that tooth and nail for the win would have killed us. But what I was reminded of at Command Fest was that really just playing with random people tends to work if you have even a small amount of a chat beforehand, or play in a conscientious way with the people that you're playing with. Like, none of that, there was hardly any games where I was like, oh, I wish that was banned or this was banned. I think it's only the big top end finishes in casual games that really bug me. And I guess putting Tooth and Nail or Emergent Ultimatum or whatever on a tier 3 list or bracket 3 list to stop bracket 2 players playing with it might just be the only thing we really need. So maybe there's some hope there. And that's my 2 cents through a very sore throat and chapped nose and unwashed hair. I should have got a shower today, but I didn't want to. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and hopefully we'll be back later in the week feeling less sorry for myself, and hopefully with less dramatic news to cover. See you in tomorrow's videos, kids.